morning. It is Friday, the 10th of May 2024, and I'm reading The Laird and the Lady, and I am now at chapter 9. This is a novel by Joan Marshall Grant. She was generally a writer of her own far memories, her reincarnation. She wrote 7 books on that. But here, this is a fictional novel, and it starts in a romantic French chateau where the lad meets his lady, and they have told a bit of a story that they are married, but they aren't yet. The Lord and the Lady, all forlorn, chapter 9. "You must not disturb yourself, my little rabbit," said Torbayon to his wife, who was helping him clean the silver. "It is not our concern how guests of the chateau conduct their intimacies." "If they had intimacies, I should not be so indelicate as to wish to know the details," said Honorine reprovingly. "But I ask you, how could one be so heartless as to see the poor child suffer neglect without trying to discover a remedy?" "I don't see anything wrong with the way he treats her," said Torbayon. "Very courteous he always is when I'm in the room. Attentive too, I should say." "But the pillows," she reminded him, as though he had not been told about them too often already. "I put the pillows from his bed onto hers. But did he take the hint, so delicately expressed? No. The first night he slept with his coat rolled up under his back, and the second night under his head, and the second night he must have taken his pillows back. 3 more days have passed, and they're still on his bed. It is an outrage." "You mean it is not even a second cousin of an outrage?" said Torbayon with a broad wink. "You are an obscene old man," she said with a show of indignation. He patted her fondly. "But at their age I was not neglectful, give me my due. It is probable the English have different habits. They come from a cold country. Perhaps they breed with a pitiful detachment of fish. One has heard stories. And none of them fit for my ears unless you've changed your companions," she said severely. "What stories?" If Marylda had known the scope of Honorine's sympathy, she would have been even more dismayed. When either of the servants were in the room, Rowan continued to play the role of the attentive husband, but when alone they might have been 2 members of a house party, content to engage in trivial conversation, but with no wish to pursue their relationship beyond Plato. She could not have been given a more helpful background, but what had she done with it? Nothing. And, she reluctantly admitted, it was not for lack of trying. She had found a stone bench on the lower terrace. Behind it a pale red bougainvillea covered the mellow wall. She had taken her violet dress down there while Rowan was in Macon, to make quite sure that the colour contrast of silk and teeming flowers could not be improved, but she could find no more becoming setting in which to be discovered. There had been a gleam in Rowan's eyes when he saw her there, which had seemed to justify her efforts. Yet he had given her the ring casually, as though it were no more than a stage prop. When they left the chateau, tomorrow probably, if the doctor came back and said, as he obviously would, that there was no reason for her to stay any longer, would the ring be no more than a souvenir of a chance meeting which Rowan did not wish to prolong? In printed linen from Jacques Fath she had gathered roses while he held the basket. Then she had arranged them in careful disorder in white and gilt urns for what she already thought of as their sitting room. He had fetched water for the vases, swept up the litter of stalks and discarded leaves, admired the effect she had created, but he could have said no less to any woman who had asked him to share such a charmingly feminine activity. She had been boyish in lattice green shorts and a white open-necked shirt, climbing down through the steep fields where vines were already in leaf, sure-footed, confident, competent, yet not neglectful of the hand he held out when a terrace wall proved unusually difficult to negotiate. They had taken lunch with them, slices of terrine and cold chicken, crisp salad wrapped in a damp napkin, raspberries in a blue china dish, a bottle of Montrachet. They had reached a stream where Rowan cooled the wine by sinking the bottle to the neck in running water. She had taken off her shoes and paddled. Surely he could not help noticing that there was nothing wrong with her legs, but all he had said was that it was lucky there were so few midges, and then spent an unnecessarily long time lighting his pipe. She had tried the appeal of the delicate female who requires a strong man to protect her, and pleading a headache, had spent dull and restless hours in her room with the curtains drawn. She hoped that he would be anxious about her and thoroughly bored with his own company. But at dinner he retailed at length the fishing expedition which he had shared with Pierre. Apparently they had borrowed a boat on the Saône, and their joint efforts had resulted in several fish. It was only with difficulty that she maintained an expression of alert interest, while he described in detail their weight and characteristics. She had been remote and mysterious in a grey chiffon with a cluster of red roses at her breast. There was even a full moon to give the wide view of folding hills and beckoning valleys a still greater enchantment than it held from the sun. The moon also made of Marylda's profile a pale cameo against the night sky as she leaned on the balustrade beside Rowan. A young wind stirred the heavy leaves of magnolias and brought the scent of the flowers down to them. A nightingale sang and another answered. "As you had a headache this afternoon, you better turn in early," Rowan had said. "I think I'll go for a stroll. Good night," he added abruptly, and walked away from her, whistling for the dog, who always reigned free after sunset. She had been ingénieuse in white muslin, the cultured, sophisticate in black velvet, gamine in a play suit from the most exclusive shop in Nice. Wistful, efficient, gay, serious, what more could a man want? Only the Eden approach remained unexplored. The nymph discovered bathing in a forest pool. No, she had already tried paddling, without success. There was a shortcut to the village by worn steps, which led down the west face of the rocky spur, that was never used except by someone who could unlock the postern door, which opened from an underground passage. Torbayon had showed her where the key hung when he had taken her down to see the dungeons. She had mentioned it to Rowan. It was at least fairly likely that he would go that way when he went to find out if the car was ready. He had said he would leave about 11 as to be back for lunch. Halfway down the steps widened into a narrow bay, little more than a ledge, protected by a low wall. Marylda, carrying 2 cushions and a quilted spread, which she had taken from one of the other bedrooms, after careful consideration that its pattern of margaritas and wheat ears embroidered on a vivid blue ground could not be improved, was there soon after 10:30. She had walked several times during the night, afraid that she might hear the sound of rain. She had wakened several times during the night, afraid that she might hear the sound of rain. Nobody could sunbathe convincingly under a grey sky. Once she had even leaned out of the window to make sure that the rustling was only leaves tapping against the shutter, and not the first heavy drops which preceded a summer storm. After all, she enjoyed sunbathing. Even if Rowan went a different way, she would not have wasted the morning. Yes, she would. It was no use deceiving herself. She might have suggested going with him. They could have lunched at the hotel where he had been with Pierre. If he saw admiration in other men's eyes, he might realize how much he was deliberately missing. Perhaps it wasn't too late to change her mind. If she ran back to the house, would there be time to put on the only dress Rowan hadn't yet seen and meet him, apparently by accident, in the courtyard? As she stood up, uncertain whether to put on her clothes or to continue with her original plan, The postern door opened on protesting hinges. She lay down, one arm outstretched, the other curved as a frame for her face. Should she pretend to be asleep or feign a maidenly confusion at being discovered naked? He'd seen her asleep often enough already, and little good it had done her. He saw her, said, "Sorry, I didn't know you were here," and ran on down the steps. Marylda methodically tore her handkerchief into strips. At least it was better than crying into it. When Honorine told her that Dr. Chavain had sent a message to say he would call at the Chateau at noon, which by tradition meant that he would stay for lunch, Marylda was not even disappointed. What use to pretend that this week was not only another proof that she who could buy everything, would never get anything she wanted? She might invent some symptoms that would keep her here for a few more days, but why continue the suspense when the least she could do was to be a good loser? People either fall in love or they don't. It wasn't Rowan's fault that his feelings were different to hers. If he had been like the other men she had met, he would have amused himself at her expense, instead of having the decency to pretend he was unaware of her interest. For God's sake, don't start lying to yourself, Marylda. Don't say interest when you mean love. Real, agonizing, ridiculous, illogical love. You must never let him know you've been hurt. The comedy must be played out with conviction. Somehow she must produce the courage to say goodbye to him, lightly, as though they had done no more than share a compartment in the train, and parted at the station, with mutual fleeting gratitude that a dull journey had been made agreeable. Would he prefer to go to Paris with her in the Citroën, or to wire Duncan that he had decided to drive his own car? It would be easier to say goodbye in an impersonal setting. They could dine together for the last time at the Tour d'Argent. She would arrange for a window table. It would be easier to be gay and brittle against the theatrical background of the lights of Paris, remote as constellations of stars. She would order dinner, a little indulgent, that he knew so much less than she did about the niceties of the gourmet. If sufficiently impressed, he might ask her advice on the wine list. He would suggest champagne, and she would say it was a little banal, better to have Corton with the duck à la presse, Chateau Clemens with a fraisé du bois. She might take him to the ambassadeurs. They had never danced together, or would that be a mistake? If he danced well, it would be still more difficult to appear gay and aloof. If he plodded around the floor, she would probably still love him too much to enjoy the sense of superiority. She stopped out the fifth cigarette she had lit since reaching the temporary heaven of her bedroom. "You are a greater fool than I suspected, Marylda. If you let him break your pride..." What has really happened? You ran into a wall on your way to Paris. You met a rather dour young man whom you are stupid enough to want to marry. He has been exceedingly courteous, but he doesn't happen to want you except as a casual acquaintance. How can a few days upset all your preconceived notions as to what you expect from life? Why not think like the sophisticate, which is one of your acts? You will exchange Christmas cards. Probably he will send you snapshots of himself and his wife. And each year there will be another stage of their children. Girls with freckles and fat legs like their mother. Boys. No doubt, let the boys be like Rowan. That would be too unfair. She heard a familiar horn and ran to the window. The Citroën was coming up the steep lane that led from the main road to the farm, and then by a still more rutted track to the avenue. Rowan must be very impatient to show her that the car no longer provided an excuse to stay here, or he would have taken the longer way. Even her own car was in league against her. Surely it should have been taken another few days to repair. If the gesture had not been too dramatic, she would have liked to take it to the edge of the cliff and watch it slide over the edge to crunch into a mass of futile metal. She ran into the dressing room and scrutinized her face in the mirror. At least She had had enough sense to deny herself the luxury of tears. Puffy eyelids would have been too much to bear. She made up her face with the anxious concentration of an actress about to play the first performance of a character part inadequately rehearsed. She lit another cigarette, stubbed it out, pulled the printed silk dress over her head, and threw it in a corner. Dragged on a pair of slacks and a blue shirt. It was easier to feel detached and competent in trousers. She walked down the staircase humming a tune she had learned as a child from Nanny Lovell. Rowan and Dr. Chavain were waiting for her in the room where the roses she had gathered already were beginning to shed their heavy petals. So that was the end of chapter 9. Chapter 10 is Nightingales Sang. Have a nice Friday.